Azoth by Zeitgeistic. Chapter 12. Projection. Projection. The process of turning the base metals into gold. Snape found him later that night when Harry was too wound up on Draco and alchemy to sleep. He slid into the Caravaggio above the desk with barely a rustled robe, only the orange glow of his oil-painted lamp flicking unalerted Harry at all.
"Do my eyes deceive me?"
asked Snape.
"A Potter working on potions in the middle of the night? It's gone 4 in the morning. Why are you awake?"
"It's only 20%, Mika Schist," Harry said instead of answering. He'd had to do something to distract him since sleep wouldn't come. Thinking about Draco's stupid rock had been the method. "Another 35% feldspar, 17% marble, 12 of basalt, 11 of biotite, and 2 of other bits and bobs, only 3% quartz. But I looked at Draco's and it was at least 65% mica, which means he was able to transfigure a stone to a non-majority mineral, and when it reverted, it went to mica instead of feldspar." Severia peered into his cauldron and wrinkled her nose at the steam coming up. She seemed to be inherently aware of the times he planned to go to the lab now and refused to be left behind, cozy pants drawer or not. Snape was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, he said,
"What are you doing with that sulfuric acid, Potter? You know you can't heat it more than—"
"I know," said Harry. He cast 3 different stasis spells on his cauldron and a potions-adjusted impedimenta, just in case the stasis spells didn't hold off the explosions.
"Potter?"
Snape said, alarmed. He moved to the back of his painting as if that would save him if acid exploded onto the canvas.
"Are you mad?"
"Yes," said Harry, peering closely at the web of wards he'd erected around his cauldron. He scooped up Severia and put her in the corner behind another set of wards. She meowed loudly in annoyance, but he figured if she had a problem with it, she shouldn't be letting peep into his rooms when he was away.
"There will be an explosion,"
Snape warned.
"Come on, Professor,"
Harry said.
"I haven't exploded anything in weeks. You said I'd get to explode something at least every week." "It was an advert, Potter. It was a prediction based on your previous level of potions aptitude."
"Well, I want to explode this, sorry."
"You are making me ill,"
Snape declared, turning away in an overdramatic disgust. Harry pursed his lips. He glanced at him long enough to show his disinterest before returning to his wards. He might be stupid enough to create a huge explosion, but he wasn't stupid enough to risk hurting his kneesel. Snape could always find another painting to haunt if it came down to it.
"You're a painting. And yet your particular brand of nuisance transcends death and canvas."
"You're going to be so jealous you never thought of this while you were alive," Harry said.
"Potter,"
Snape growled,
"you are truly magnificent. I'd once thought that you could not be surpassed, and I was right. You cannot. But you have surpassed yourself today, and I am a vindicated man. I am ready to die now. When I reach hell and I meet your father there, I will greet him and I will say, 'Potter, I taught everything I knew to your son, little Potter, and he nearly became a potions master. But your genes won out, stubborn as they were, and he's dead now. He blew his fucking head off in a pointless explosion.'"
Snape was still ranting in the background as Harry threw a ward over his frame.
"Stop this at once,"
Snape said.
"I've taught you better than this stupidity."
Harry grinned. "Nope. You've taught me enough to know why this is brilliant." He lay awake for hours watching Draco breathe and turning this over in his mind, tracing out every possible outcome, every possible route. Abruptly, Harry lowered the flame. Snape paused, interested despite himself. Hesitantly, he returned to the front of the painting, peering down into the cauldron below.
At a slow red fire, calcination will occur,
he observed.
You are within degrees of it.
Yeah. He fished Draco's gneiss from his pocket and levitated it to his cauldron, wrapping a protective spell around it to prevent acid from touching it just yet. The flame was still orange, not quite cool enough for his purposes. He lowered the heat again until it was sulky red smolder. He released the levitation spell on the stone, and it sunk below the surface untouched. Snape sneered.
Potter, do you know what will happen if you let that sulfuric acid remain heated too long? It will
explode, Harry finished.
I know. Then what are you doing, you imbecile?
Calcination, Harry said, watching intently. He bit his lip, waiting for the wards to change colors with the process. There are minerals in there that act like a flux. I figured it out when Draco said the stone had reverted to mica instead of feldspar. It's not just metamorphic, it's polymorphic. All the gneiss around here in Scotland, it's like it wants to change all the time. It's going to calcinate, Professor, like organic things. By the end, even Professor Snape was interested, and he watched the cauldron almost unblinking. Harry was tensed with excitement and anticipation. This was the first step, he thought excitedly. This was the secret beginning of the magnum opus. It was hours later before the wards burst bright red, signaling the level of calcium oxide had reached the threshold Harry set. There was a rustle of fabric from Snape's frame, and Harry knew he was just as antsy as Harry now, even if he'd never say it. Harry approached the cauldron, carefully peered inside. Through the red haze of the wards, he could see what was left of the stone floating on top of the acid in its little protective bubble. He exhaled in a rush. It was dusty, powdery white, and in the middle, a bright, clear pile of quartz crystals, purified by fire, as alchemists had sought to achieve for millennia.
Sulfur burns blood red at high enough heat,
Snape said then, and Harry nodded because, yes, he knew that. He read it last year when he first began the insane mission of taking up patients for life.
The Philosopher's Stone was blood red too,
Harry said instead.
I remember,
Snape said, and for once his voice was quiet, though no less intent than it ever was. Harry wondered briefly if Snape had ever attempted to reach the elusive third degree of alchemy, as only Nicholas Flamel had ever done before, or if he'd been satisfied being a second-degree alchemist forever. Harry could not imagine Snape ever being satisfied with less than perfection, but likewise could he not imagine Snape trying something so foolhardy as this.
I'm going to drop the shield around the quartz and ash, Harry warned him. Be ready to run to another frame if the water around your frame starts to shake.
It was a testament to Snape's curiosity that he only nodded instead of lambasting Harry for how incredibly Gryffindorishly stupid this was. Just to be safe, Harry picked up Severia and put her outside the room in another warded pen before he returned, took a deep breath, and removed the localized protego. The potion hissed dangerously. Harry added another couple of wards, suddenly unsure of his backcasting for the first time in his life, and then, before he could change his mind, raised the heat on the burner as high as it would go. The flame soared upwards, burning red, then orange, then yellow, and still that wasn't high enough. The hissing grew louder and louder, and the reddened wards trembled under the great pressure. Harry bit his lip. In for a nut, in for a galleon, or quite possibly his life. He swished his wand, and the flames burst, white-hot and then blue. The cauldron began screaming with pressure, but it still wasn't hot enough. Pushing everything he had into the spell, he slashed his wand upwards, and with it the room went blood-red and blindingly bright. In the distance Harry heard Snape exclaim, but he didn't have time to think about that as the first ward around the cauldron tore open, and a gale of heat and wind and magic slammed out in all directions. Harry was thrown backwards, his wand falling away somewhere, and had barely enough time to call up Protego before he struck the wall. His body jerked with the impact, even with the shield charm around himself. He slid to the floor as the bright red light faded from the room. Harry lay there, panting and chilled from the sudden loss of heat. The classroom was eerily quiet. He pulled himself to his feet and winced. His wrist was definitely broken, and he was fairly certain his ankle was, at the very least, sprained. A glance at Snape's frame showed it to be intact, though the scene was faded now and had a reddish tinge. Snape was not in sight. He limped over to the cauldron, breathing heavily.
"You're alive?"
He exhaled in a rush, looked gratefully up at the portrait. Snape was back, not destroyed by the explosion. His expression was blank.
"Yeah, my wrist is broken, though."
Snape did not seem overly fazed by this. His gaze caught downwards into the cauldron, and his expression remained unchanged. Harry was almost afraid to look. And then Snape looked back up at him, and Harry felt his heart pound frantically at the careful neutrality shown there. His eyes sunk close for a moment, and only afterwards, when he'd calmed himself, did he look down into the cauldron. The acid was gone, all consumed in the transformation. What was left was an oddly shaped stone, milky, ashy white in the center, and sharp, bright, blood red outside.
"This solution,"
Snape said quietly. Harry nodded, unable to speak. In his cauldron, in this makeshift lab only corridors away from where Draco slept, there now sat the beginning of the Philosopher's Stone. He, Harry, second only to Neville in potions and aptitude, had completed the first 2 steps of the alchemical process. Absurdly, he began to panic. He looked wilder to Snape and found that Snape was still looking back at him with that same thoughtful expression. Harry couldn't look away. For the first time, he desperately wished Snape was still alive, because this was intense and profound and significant, and he needed to know that someone understood the magnitude of what had just happened, and maybe sleeping with Draco earlier hadn't helped at all, because this entire day was quickly becoming too much, too overwhelming, and Harry had no idea what to. The door opened. Draco came in, carrying Severia.
"Harry,"
Draco bit out.
"It's 6 in the fucking morning. What the fuck are you?"
Harry looked at him, terrified and not knowing why. All of a sudden, the pain from his wrist and the ankle were too much. Or maybe it was just too much seeing Draco again and not having Draco be bitter about sleeping with Harry or falling asleep in his bed, but instead about Harry not being there when he woke up. It was just too much altogether. Harry fainted. Madame Pomfrey clucked.
"I thought we were past this, Potter."
Harry scowled at a swollen wrist. It wasn't fair that he was being refused a quick healing because she wanted to lecture.
"It was an accident. My apprenticeship involves conducting experimental patients. Explosions aren't unusual. I took standard precautions."
She clucked again. Draco sneered and said,
"At 6 in the morning without letting anyone know where you were?" "Genius waits for no man,"
Harry muttered.
"Besides, Professor Snape was there the whole time." "And you?"
Pomfrey said, turning on the man now occupying the watercolor seascape behind Harry's bed. Never seen a professor look quite so pastel.
"I'm surprised at you, Severus. This behavior I expect from Potter. Hey, but not from you,"
she finished sternly.
"Is the entire world going mad, letting an apprentice experiment with potions at indecent hours when no one would know they were missing at all if something happened? He could have died from some...
She waved her hand about, searching for a word.
"Gume, it's a blessing Malfoy was up early to check on a Transfigurations project." Sure,"
Snape said, bored. Harry craned his neck to look up at the painting. Even upside down, he could see the arch look Snape was shooting Draco.
"Can someone just please fix my bloody wrist?"
Harry said. Where was Hermione when he needed her? Australia? The owl turned to look at him. He crossed his arms gingerly and stared them down. Finally, Pomfrey exhaled in a rush of air and removed her hand from her hips long enough to set his wrist. It snapped, literally, back into place, and Harry managed to withhold everything but his initial yelp of surprise. But Merlin, fuck, that hurt! Draco eyed him dispassionately, the evil wanker. Madame Pomfrey moved down to his ankle and prodded about much more than was necessary, before she repaired the ligament and siphoned off the bruising. Harry bit his lip the whole time, but refused to let any of these people hear him make one noise of pain. He had his pride after all. Finally, he was released, and Draco condescended to escort him up to the Great Hall for an early breakfast. Only a few students were up at this time, and none of the staff. They climbed up to the head table, and Harry flopped into his usual chair, exhausted. He was just digging into his eggy toast when Draco said, "So, a philosopher's stone?" His hand disappeared into his robe pocket, and when it re-emerged, he was holding an oddly shaped, blood-red stone. Harry blinked at it. He'd almost convinced himself that it all had been an hallucination brought on by the explosion. "Not quite," he said. "It's just a red rock right now." Draco lifted one eyebrow and returned the stone to his pocket before any of the students could see it. "This is why you wanted that gneiss." "Yeah, obviously." His mouth flattened. "This is our project. Why didn't you take me with you?" Harry stood. Were they really going to have this conversation? Was he really going to have to say that thing that was hovering between them unspoken? "You were sleeping," he said carefully. Maybe it was Harry's imagination, but he thought Draco's cheeks pinkened. What would we have thought, waking up naked and alone in Harry's chilly dungeon room? Relief, Harry had expected. But now he wondered. Had it really been disappointment? "Why won't you?" Draco asked. A pregnant silence passed between them, with Draco looking perfectly collected, if annoyed, and Harry thrashing about in panic somewhere in his head. Finally, when it had gone on too long, and Draco still hadn't relented, Harry admitted, "I had too much on my mind to sleep." Draco finally looked away, busying himself with pouring himself a cup of tea, and only then stirring in the milk. "Posh git." "You were right," he finally said, "about the catalyst and the opposites and balance. Have you always been this clever?" Harry rolled his eyes. "Yes, Malfoy," he said patiently. "I'm not stupid, just lazy, and largely influenced by Ron during my developmental years instead of by you." Draco nodded, accepting this easily. "What was the different about this one piece of gneiss? The explosion woke me up, so I know it was big. Could have easily been fatal if not for your annoying magical strength. So death or near death is apparently required to make an object that gives you eternal life. It's macabre, but it's balanced. Why that particular stone, though?" Harry froze. 1,000 puzzle pieces were slotting into place. He searched his memory for any instant of another wizard having a crow animagus and came up with nothing. That didn't necessarily mean anything, but, well, he and Hermione had read lists of hundreds of animals that other people achieved when they became animagi during that lonely Christmas without one. There had never been a crow, though there were dozens of instances of almost every other kind of bird. And because half of Harry was a crow, he'd seen the way crows saw. He'd watched little dead things crawl all over Draco, who was fully alive in a way Harry hadn't been since he was 18 months old. "The beetle," he said. "It walked on that one, and it changed it. It made it, I don't know, it made it alive, or not dead at least. I think it took away everything that was deathly about it, made it amenable to life." Draco looked at him like he was mad. He probably was. "What beetle?" "The spirit beetle," Harry said. "In the forest. They were all over you, but they weren't interested in me at all." Alarmed, Draco said, "What?" He started looking all about himself as if they were still on them. Harry shook his head, still trying to process everything he just realized.
They were spirits, and they followed you the whole time. Remember when you were in my head and I was showing you how to transform? They were everywhere, those little blue spirits. Did you see them?
Draco nodded, eyes wide.
Potter, what are you saying? I didn't know until that day in the forest, but I can see them now, even when I'm human. They were all over the forest and all over you. You had rune spores around your neck and that thestrots nuzzling your hands. I was so attracted to you. And I know why now, because you balanced the magic. They were wholly dead and you were wholly alive. When they were near you, everything balanced. That beetle, it crawled over the gneiss trying to get closer to you, and you noticed it as soon as it did. I thought at first they were going to hurt you, and I didn't want to scare you, so I got you away and didn't say anything. But they weren't going to hurt you. They helped, if anything. The beetle took everything deadly about you into itself so that you'd be better able to balance it, and it did the same to that gneiss. It was purified, and that's why it was capable of being transformed into this stone.
Draco blinked at him.
Fuck, Harry. Malfoy, stop swearing at the head table for Merlin's sake,
said Neville, sitting down beside Harry. They both jumped, startled. Harry resumed eating his eggy toast. Neville struck up a conversation about the upcoming Quidditch draft, and Harry nodded along, but inside his heart was pounding. Draco's hand came and rested on his thigh, squeezing reassuringly. Inside his head was a repeating exclamation of nonsense because Draco was touching him not at all like a maid. He looked over at him and just knew he looked stupid and startled, but Draco smiled at him, a little silted at first, like he was unused to the expression. Unfortunately, it did nothing to reassure Harry at all. Only made him realize that he really super loved Draco's smile and would be desolate without it.
Separation is the third operation,
said Draco from the floor. His feet were propped up on the hearth, toes flexing in the warmth. The stone tumbled slowly in the air above him, catching the firelight and refracting it all over Harry's sitting room. Somewhere behind him, Severia was making a noise as she tried to catch the light.
It's letting go, said Harry,
who was feeling rather more philosophical after the intensity of that morning, with the explosion and Draco touching him in a non-sexual way. Draco hummed at that, and they were quiet for a bit longer until he said,
It's cloudy in the middle, impure.
Harry nodded, though Draco wouldn't be able to see it from this angle.
How do we separate it from the quartz?
Draco frowned, reached up and tapped the stone with his wand. It emitted a soft, even hum that resonated all through the room.
You're right,
he said wonderingly.
I've never seen red quartz before, but it's definitely resonating like it. It's a sulfur, said Harry. I saw it before it transmuted. It was crystal clear. We need to destroy the impurity and then reconjoin the quartz with the calcinated ash. What destroys things?
Harry shrugged, and the movement caused his elbow to brush against Draco's. He could think of probably 1,000 things.
The killing curse?
Draco tensed.
Fire, decay, disease.
Heartbreak, probably.
Panacea,
Draco murmured. His toes stopped flexing.
It's incorporated during this step.
Oh. Harry breathed, realizing something entirely different. He rolled to face Draco, and Draco copied the movement. For a moment, it felt like this was normal and usual, and something that Harry could depend on. This was the part where he became his own alchemy, where he understood the beauty hidden in the transformation. Separation was when all the components created during the solution came apart and expunged what they didn't need, to make themselves pure and ready for conjunction, free of inclusions and elements of dis-ease. It was the letting go and the making ready. And for Harry, it was when he finally accepted that love didn't just go away, and it wasn't awful, and he could let it overwhelm him without letting it destroy him.
It can remove inclusions, Draco said. If we heat it again, it might destroy the cloudy parts.
He leaned in and kissed Draco, and Draco let him. He made a needy sound in the back of his throat, and Harry rolled over on top of him, exploring his mouth again. He pulled away after a moment, long enough to say,
"You're forgetting, Draco. We don't want to destroy the bad parts. We have to encourage them. Balance."
Draco pulled back, scrunching his nose distastefully.
"I feel like you're trying to tell me something." "I'm more than just a potions prodigy, Draco,"
Harry said airily.
"I'm a man of philosophy as well. You're going to have to deal with it." "Oh?"
said Draco, nipping at his lip.
"Why is that?"
Harry lay down on top of him, pressing his ear to Draco's chest and listening to his rapid heartbeat.
"Because if I wait long enough, you might fall in love with me too. Then you're going to realize that I'd never hold you back or try to kate you, and you're not going to want to leave me either."
Draco exhaled in a rush, but a denial Harry half expected never came. Instead, they lay there, quietly, and Draco's heartbeat didn't slow down for a long, long time.
"Dear Harry, my mum wanted me to write and see if you were coming to the Borough for Christmas this year. Or she wanted me to write and remind you that you are coming, since we both know that no one else really has a say in that matter. I've got a couple of weeks off, and Lavender's coming with. I have something I want to tell you, so maybe we could meet in Diagon this weekend for Christmas shopping. I sent an owl off to Hermione, but I guess she's still in Australia. It's been 2 weeks already. I thought she and Bulstrode had that spell sorted before they left. Anyway, Mom made me invite Bulstrode as well, because I guess they connected over Celestina Warbeck, of all things. So if you and Malfoy are talking again, I reckon you could bring him. Dad said something nice about how upstanding he seemed at the ministry trial over the summer, and that got Mum in a tizzy over what a fine young man he's apparently become. Makes me want to sick up. Anyway, I'll see you at the Leaky on Saturday, say around noon. Ron."
Ron was wearing a Weasley jumper, but it had a large B knitted into the front instead of an R. Harry grinned as he wound his way through the pub from the Floo. Even making a decent salary, Weasleys had a way of upcycling unlike any other. Harry supposed that with all the training, Ron didn't fit so well into his old jumpers anymore. He noticed Harry's approach and waved happily.
"It's Bill's," Ron said upon catching Harry's smirk. "I figure it was better than wearing Charlie, since my middle name starts with B, you know." "Right,"
Harry said, grinning. They stared at each other awkwardly for a moment, and then Harry couldn't take it anymore. He threw his arms around Ron and hugged him, not at all concerned with how gay they looked. Ron hugged him back, which was an even bigger surprise. It was here, a week before Christmas, that Harry realized his platonic marriage to Ron was never in danger at all. It was just that there had been a different sort of piece missing, one that Ron could never fill, and Harry needed both him and Draco. They might have difficulties, but any friendship did, and it wasn't fair for him to compare Ron as a child to Draco as a man. Seeing Ron now, wearing his brother's Weasley jumper in public, without so much as a blush, just showed how much his self-esteem had grown, and now, Harry was pretty sure that Ron wouldn't be worried about coming in second to the boy who lived either.
"It's really boring without you,"
said Ron when they pulled apart. Finally noticed Harry's robes and snorted.
"Merlin, you look just like Snape. Bloody hell, are you ever going to cut your hair? Tell me you aren't growing it as long as Snape's."
Harry recalled the way Draco had threaded his finger through his hair just this morning, and decided that Ron could bugger off if he didn't like it.
"Maybe just to my shoulders," he said.
Ron snorted again.
"Whatever, mate. Listen, I need to get something for Ginny and George."
He wrinkled his nose.
"Mum's making me get Percy a present too. He's coming for Christmas this year, and she's going nuts trying to make sure everything's perfect. I was thinking of regifting that color-coded planner Hermione gave me in 4th year."
Harry perked up.
"Oh, maybe I can give him the one she gave me. 2's always better than 1, right? I was going to chuck it in the fire, but I always felt guilty every time I was about to do it." "She'll be pleased it got a good home," Ron said hopefully.
They stopped at the broom shop first, well, because they were young, Quidditch-obsessed men, not to put too fine a point on it. Harry stared in awe at the new firebolt model, which burst into real flames when flown. He decided that he'd had quite enough of flying through fire for one lifetime, regardless of the declaration. Guaranteed safety spells on every model. Ron bought himself a new tin of broom wax, and they wondered a bit, having no idea how to choose presents for friends and family, even after years of practice. Harry picked up an arithmetically aligned broom compass for Millicent, for lack of any better idea.
This really isn't my speciality,
Harry admitted after another fruitless hour.
Maybe we should start with Hermione.
They headed to Flourish and Blotts without requiring any discussion, but the shop was huge, endlessly filled with books and people, and one step inside the door had them both quickly backtracking.
Maybe we shouldn't get her a book this year,
Ron suggested.
Agreed. What else does she need? I don't know,
said Ron.
Maybe one of those fancy dictaquills so she can finally write that bloody book about the hunt for things that cannot be named.
Harry laughed, but it was still a good idea.
Brill, you get her that and I'll get her one of those easy-added writing journals.
That sorted, they moved on to various and sundry Weasleys. He and Ron ended up going in together on a precise prose quill for Percy because it was sort of expensive, and Mrs. Weasley would have been really miffed if they'd actually re-gifted old homework journals to him. He'd be really pleased with it, Harry suspected, since they edited everything one wrote with it to be as dry and academic as possible. Harry picked up some new Quidditch gloves for Ginny and an indestructible quadrant for George, who, Ron said, had recently destroyed his last one with a new prototype. He'd have to go to Muggle London for Mr. Weasley, who had recently decided definitely needed a PlayStation and that new Dance Dance Revolution game. It was more a gift for Harry, really, since he desperately wanted to watch Mr. Weasley playing it. He'd picked up a fishing net with a dream catcher weaved into it for Luna and a pack of rare seeds for Neville. He had 2 overflown bags worth of sparkly toys and Kneazle nib for his little munchkin, Severia. He even got Millicent something.
What should I get your mum?
Harry asked, crunching his nose. Ron shrugged. They walked past Haberdasher, and he said,
"Oh, knitting pattern."
All things considered, Harry thought with a sigh that probably wasn't a bad idea. Pulled Ron into the shop, and they looked around, identical grimaces on their faces.
"May I help you?"
Harry cleared his throat.
"Have you got, I don't know, fancy patterns or yarn or something?"
The shop witch raised wild grey eyebrows. "Who are you shopping for, dear?"
"My mum,"
said Ron, and he gestured helplessly at his grey Weasley jumper. The bee was done up in a flourish that was waved about like a flag in the wind. "Ah," said the witch knowingly. "Come with me. I've just a thing." 15 minutes later, he and Ron exited the shop, confused and vaguely disturbed. Harry had never realized how deep knitting could get, nor did he think he'd ever wanted to know. Yet he was pretty sure that Mrs. Weasley would like the bright yellow flying yarn, and Ron had picked her up a new set of non-clicking knitting needles. He had no idea what one knitted with flying yarn, but the witch had assured them both with a disturbing wink that Ron's mom would know. After that, only Draco was left, and Harry reckoned for Ron lavender. He had absolutely no idea what to get Draco. He was poncy and elitist, so clothing was right out, since Harry would never have good enough fashion sense to get something he liked. He had even more money than Harry, so expensive nonsense was out too. Since he was terrified of entering Flourish and Blotts, it was no to books as well. What did he like? Quidditch, Transfiguration, potions. Harry, probably, sort of. Sex? Maybe Harry could get him flavoured.
No, Merlin, no.
What else? He definitely liked being free. Harry grimaced, thinking the word. What could he give him that would show Harry didn't want to stifle him?
"Will I be getting Malfoy?"
Ron asked, somehow reading his thoughts. It startled Harry enough that he couldn't hold back the shock.
"What? How did you know I'm getting him anything at all?"
Ron shrugged.
"Aren't you?" You've picked up something for just about everyone else, and you've not talked about him at all, even when I mentioned Hermione saying he helped her out with her animagus form. That's weird for you. You always have an opinion on Malfoy. Yeah, but what? Harry said again. When did you get so perceptive? Ron blushed. I just thought you were friends with the pacey git is all. Oh, Harry said. Right, yeah, we are. I don't know what to get him. If it were me, Ron said, I'd get him a one-way port key to Antarctica. Harry snorted, unable to prevent a laugh that burst forth. He had no desire whatsoever to send Draco to Antarctica, but, well, maybe there was something in that suggestion. Something completely different from what Ron intended. Harry diverted back to the Quidditch shop. There was, in fact, something Harry could get him, something that he wouldn't be able to get on his own, something that would hopefully show Harry had no intentions of caging him. The shop owner looked pleased when he and Ron re-entered. He approached the desk and, inwardly cringing, tossed his head, casually, to flick his overlong fringe away from his forehead. He could practically feel Ron's eyebrows soaring up. "Miss Potter," the man said, beaming. "What a pleasure!" Harry smiled as charmingly as he could. "Are you selling tickets for the World Cup this summer?" he asked. "But of course." Harry grinned, leaned forward conspiratorially. People always liked when they felt like Harry Potter was giving them special attention. How about private seats down with the English national team? The shopkeeper whistled. "There are a few here and there, I've heard, but they aren't really for sale to the general public, you understand." "I just want one," he said, "for my friend. Kiggle's his favourite player. If you can get me in contact with whomever I need to talk to, or help me get one, I'll buy my next broom from your shop and I'll let you pick which one I get." The shopkeeper's mouth hung open for a moment, then he snapped it shut. "I know the captain this year," he said. "I'll write him and see what I can do." Harry beamed. "Brilliant. If you can help me get the tickets before Christmas, I'd be really grateful. I can be reached by all any time, whatever I need to do." "I'll do my best, Mr. Potter. Merry Christmas." Harry waved, and he and Ron returned to the street. A light snow had begun to fall, and it stuck to Ron's hair, which was kind of fetching, Harry could admit, in a completely bromancy sort of way. Ron was fit, but he was not Harry's idea of fit. After so much exposure to red hair, he'd rather desensitized himself to the appeal. "Just one?" Ron asked. He was grateful he chose to ask about that instead of the fact that Harry had just used his name to try and score something that regular people couldn't get. He still felt sort of sleazy about the matter, but Draco was bloody hard to shop for. "Want to go to World Cup alone?" Harry smiled to himself. "Draco would." "Draco?" Ron repeated slowly. Harry shrugged. It would be a testament of exactly how much Ron's perception really had improved if he figured it out. Much like the shopkeeper, Ron whistled slowly. "More than Harry," he said. He stared at him, eyes wide, and nearly walked into an old witch carrying a little basket of dissected slugs. "Yep." Ron faced forward again. They carefully didn't look at each other. "Well," Ron said. "Yep," Harry repeated. And that was all that was said on the matter. Ron cleared his throat. "I suppose this is a good time to bring up lavender," he said. "Oh?" said Harry. They were still carefully not looking at each other. Matters of the heart were entirely too much to bear when they were about your best mate. It was gross, frankly. "Yeah, I already got a Christmas present, you see." Harry had a feeling he could guess where this was going, but when Ron pulled him to the side into the mouth of an alley and fished into his pocket, Harry realized he hadn't really been prepared at all. Ron snapped open the little box, displaying it carefully close to his body. Horror instincts making him wary of unscrupulous people who might try to mug them for it. The ring was sparkly and big and bright. "Merlin?" "It's ruby," Ron said nervously. "She likes those. Calls the red. And the halo. That's what the jeweler called it. Those are amethyst. I picked those because they're the colour of lavender. It's a bit, well, loud, but lavender likes that sort of thing, you know. You'd think she'll like it, Merlin. I should have gone with something more traditional, like emeralds and sapphires, but bugger it all. Harry, say something.
It took Harry a moment to find his voice. Not because the ring was red and gold and purple, but because he just realized that his best mate was planning on getting married, and Harry had only got off with another person for the first time a few weeks ago.
Mate, she'll love it.
It was, after all, overwhelmingly lavender. Ron exhaled in a rush, slipped the box back in his jeans pocket.
Good, okay, brilliant. I just wanted to make sure. I felt like I couldn't do it until you gave me an idiot check. I trust your opinion, you know, even if you're rubbish at women.
Harry felt warm all over, despite the snow.
Getting better, man, though.
Ron scrunched his nose, all his freckles merged together for the duration.
Right, well, why are all my friends gay?
He then wondered, as they made their way back towards the other end of Diagon.
First you, now Hermione's galvanating off with Millicent Bulstrode, and Slytherins at that, the both of you. It's not right, Harry, the things you put me through. I've been imagining 100 years of Christmas dinners with Malfoy ever since we left the broom shop, and Harry, it's not a pretty sight. Are you sure you're up for it? With his colouring, he's going to be a right eyesore at 120, all that white.
Harry laughed and shoved Ron with his shoulder.
I'm sure thing. No red and purple rings, though. Besides, I'm bisexual, really. Remember Ginny and Cho? Oh, how could I forget? Disasters all round.
They had dinner at the Leaky and Ron paid. It was only as weird as Harry let it be, since Ron didn't seem to give it a second thought. This, too, was like separation, Harry thought. They'd taken their friendship and sorted out all the diseased parts and left only what was healthy and good. Now, if only he could figure out how to replicate it in the lab. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Azoth by Zeitgeistic. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.